Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to go over table 9.1. Now, I will say this, that from a purely testing perspective, the chances of you getting a bunch of questions from this particular table is probably slim, but it's one of those tables where I'm asked fairly frequently, how do I memorize? How do I memorize the bones? In this case, the bones of the axial and appendicular skeleton. And so I will go ahead and try and help you with that from a purely memorization perspective. The best way I found, just in general, to memorize, especially lists of terms or bones or muscles or whatever the case is to you're reading it, right? This is what we call the read, write, recite. You could basically say read, write, rewrite, rewrite, and rewrite and rewrite multiple times. The more you physically rewrite something, right, after you're looking at it and even saying it out loud in your head, the better chance that your brain will, I guess, absorb that term better. You'll memorize it. Short-term memory into the mid-term memory, and then hopefully into your longer-term memory storage so that you can answer questions on an exam. Again, ACE is simply not going to ask you a whole lot of questions on what are the bones of this or what are the particular bones of that. But with that said, it's not a bad idea to kind of have a decent idea of what the names of the bones are, particularly in the axial, in the what we call the axial skeleton. So when you look at the skeletal system, we talk about both the axial and what's known as the appendicular. The axial skeleton is basically the skull, the thorax, right? And so that's going to contain a total of 80 bones. Okay, yes, I guess you would want to know, the 206, right? 206 bones in the body. That's an adult, by the way, just so you know, keep that in mind. In an adult skeleton, the reason we say adult skeleton is because newborns, right? Babies up to, I forgot how old it is, 6 months, 8 months, or whatever, they actually have more bones. How could that be? Well, simply because many of those, well, I shouldn't say many, but a number of the bones essentially have not fused. And so when two bones at birth are separate and movable, that's two separate bones. You would give them names. Well, as you get older into your adolescence, adult, boom, they fuse together. Well, that's a single bone. Okay, so that means that now in adult, it's not two bones, it's one bone. Okay, so that's why we say it. So we talk about 206 total bones in the body, 80 in the axial skeleton, the skull and the thorax, right? And then the appendicular skeleton, which is all the extremities, shoulder girdle, right? And hips, pelvis. And that's 126. So that's where they're breaking it up. Now, if you want to draw a picture, again, people have asked me how to memorize it. Okay, well, again, for me, I try to go from general. So you have axial, appendicular. Did you memorize that? Axial, appendicular. Say it again and write it. Axial, appendicular. Hopefully 2 hours from now, if you're after watching the video, you could write down the two components of the skeletal system. You would go axial, appendicular. Okay, write that down. And if you do it again tomorrow, it'll get deep, stronger into your mid long term memory, to the point where, like many of us have been doing it for a long time, it's just part of your memory. So axial skeleton, appendicular skeleton, the total number of bones, yeah, I guess it's not a bad idea. Probably the most important, I would think, even from a testing perspective, is to know the number of bones in the spinal column, and that's why they give you figure 9.3, your vertebral column. And so you've got 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and then the sacrum and the coccyx, which are, by the way, the sacrum and the coccyx are fused vertebrae. So the sacrum is 5 fused vertebrae, but it's a single unit skeletal system unit, right? So you don't have movement between those fused vertebrae. The coccyx as well is 4 fused vertebrae, and the 2 top cervical vertebrae, the atlas and the axis. Sometimes you're asked that question, but not very often. And but just keep those numbers in mind: 7, 12, 5. 7, 12, 5. Right? 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar. Now on this list, the skull, for instance, so what I would do is I have axial, appendicular. Axial skeleton is a skull, thorax. Axial skeleton, skull, thorax. And that's what you remember. That's your primary, secondary level of memorization. Appendicular is going to be the lower extremity, upper extremity, the pelvis or the pelvic girdle, shoulder girdle, right? Your scapulae, clavicle. And so 1, 2, 3, 4 components of the appendicular skeleton, right? Your arms, upper extremities, legs, pelvis, pelvic girdle, and your scapular, clavicular bones. Okay, really easy to break it up into those two: axial, appendicular, skull, thorax, upper, lower, pelvic, scapulae, clavicle. So they throw that in there. So total number of bones. Again, if you want to, and if it interests you, you can Google the names of the bones of the cranium, the parietal, the sphenoid, the ethmoid, the temporal. There's 8 bones in the skull. Now they're fused in the adult, or at least the parietal, temporal. They're fused together, but they are actual separate bones. So you could look them up, and if you're interested in memorizing that. In the face, the face is pretty cool. You got lots of bones, all these separate little bones. It's really interesting actually when you look at it, because you're saying to yourself, how can there be 14 bones? Well, you've got small bones. This is like one bone right here, this orbital thing here, and then you got this over here, and you got one deep inside there, and there's these tiny little bones here, and you remember you got a lot of space up in your face. Okay, and your sinus cavities, and that's by the way, that's where the majority of those bones are. Anyway, they make up the sinus cavities and the orbital components of the eye, and of course the mouth. Then you have the hyoid bone, which is just so you know, I believe it's the only bone that's not attached to other bones. How's that? That bone is located right up, just above in the larynx back. Yeah, I forgot exactly where it's at, but you got one of those, and again, it's not attached to any other bone. Kind of interesting. And then, of course, your vertebral column, we just spoke about that. There's 26, 7, 12, 5, 5, and 4. And that leads to 26, apparently. So, by the way, the vertebral column, yes, cervical, thoracic, lumbar. That's important to know. Now, okay, so now that you've got that, there's 80 total bones just in the axial skeleton. In the appendicular skeleton, you got total of 126 bones. The only thing I think with the appendicular skeleton is knowing the difference between the bones of the hands and the bones of the feet, lower extremities. What you'll notice is, take a look at the list of lower extremity and upper extremity, and what do you notice? The lower and the upper both have what are known as phalanges. Okay. The difference between the foot, the bones or the short bones of the foot that lead out to the toes, are metatarsals. So I just always remember toes, tarsal toes, metatarsals. Carpals are the hands. So tarsals, carpals. So phalanges, metatarsals, metacarpals. So that's the way I would do it. Metatarsals, metacarpals, right? Metatarsals, metacarpals, tarsals, carpals, phalanges, meta, and then either a tarsal or a carpal. That's one way to memorize it. Of course, in the lower extremity, above the knee, have the patella, tibia, fibula, which is the lower leg, and of course the femur is the bone of the upper leg. So you just write those down, and if you want to draw a picture of it, I know drawing pictures can actually help. You'll actually remember these. You will. So if you start from the upper leg, so you got the femur, fibula, tibula, the patella rides on top, and now you get into the bones of the foot, right? So you have phalanges, metatarsals, tarsals, And pelvic girdle, you have the hip or pelvis, right? Which is the ilium, ischium, and the pubis, right? So you can just understand it's the pelvic girdle. That's the way I would memorize it. Shoulder girdle is the clavicle, and the scapulae. So they ride basically on top of. It's almost like they ride on top of the rib cage itself, and then of course the upper extremity, like I said, phalanges, metacarpals, right? Metacarpals, and then you have the carpals, the radius and the ulnar, and the humerus. So in a sense, it's like you have an upper arm bone and a upper leg bone, femur, ulnar. Humerus, femur, and then you got two. Then you got two bones in the lower arm, I get forearm, and the lower leg, right? Tibia, fibula, radius, ulnar. Again, there's some correlation connection that can make this a little bit easier to memorize. And if you break it down as I'm going through this with you, I would hope that you would think to yourself, well, that's actually not too difficult to memorize. I've got my skull, got 8 bones in there. I got my skull, I got my vertebral column. I've got 7, 12, 5, 5, and 4, right? The sacrum 5 fused, coccyx 4 fused. Pelvic girdle, if you want to do it and even draw a picture, got the pelvic girdle. And then I've got my upper extremities and lower extremities. I've got an upper leg, femur, upper arm, humerus. I've got the radius and the ulnar of the forearm, tibia, fibula in the lower leg, and then I've got my foot. So I've got all my phalanges, and then I've got my metatarsals, metacarpals, carpals, tarsals. Okay. And basically now you're adding all those up. Now there are, just so you know, they give different names to the bones that are known as the phalanges and metacarpals, but collectively that's what they're called. And so there's your axial and appendicular skeleton. Remember, this goes along with the understanding of how joints work, and that's why it's could be fairly important. Now, remember, again, just a recap of what we just went through. This is table 9.1. I'm not saying that you have to memorize it, but I do find anatomy very interesting. And so for me, I always wanted to know what the names of these particular areas of the body were. And if that's what you're interested in, that's what you're looking at. 206 bones in the adult skeleton, axial, appendicular skeleton, broken up into the skull, thorax. Oh, and by the way, there were ribs in there. I forgot to tell you. The thorax is the sternum, and the ribs. Sorry. But that's your axial skeleton, appendicular skeleton, arms, legs, pelvic girdle, right? The hip itself, the scapula, okay, scapula bone, and the clavicle. Okay, so write it down, and then write it down a couple of more times. I guarantee after a couple of times of doing this and then repeating it a couple of days after that, that's the way. Even when I was going through school for all of this, that's the only way I could do it. I just used a lot of paper, wrote down a lot of over and over and over and over. After a while, you can just do this and write it. It becomes automatic, and that's what you're trying to do ultimately if you want to memorize table 9.1. So I hope that was helpful. If it was helpful, you could write the word understand, or even, I guess in this case, write the word helpful. By the way, make sure you give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. If you have, you're great. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Also, click on the link in the description box below if you want full access to all of the ACE exam study materials that we have at Body Design University. You've got quizzes, you've got practice exams, we've got an audio component, we've got a video for every chapter, we have general study guides for this. We have an entire Quizlet group of study sets for every single chapter in this textbook. That could be really, really helpful. Remember, Quizlet every Wednesday night, Quizlet live exam study from 6 to 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. Keep that in mind if you live in California or Colorado or Illinois or wherever you're from, so that you know the proper time zone. 6 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time every Wednesday night. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Thanks.